So a lot of changes have happened over the last couple of years, and a lot of y'all are wondering, what are my politics? And you have pretty much nothing to gather but to reduce just, singular topics I've made on certain things, whether it be the woke media or the state of film, or what I think about certain social issues like LGBT. And I have a whole testimony video on my journey with God that includes certain aspects of my personality, that includes certain things like how I identified gender-wise and sexuality, and what I think about things like abortion and things like that I've changed my mind on. But I haven't really given a sort of comprehensive history ever really of what my politics were. It kind of was just like, topic by topic, I just gave my opinion on it, which sometimes fluctuated, but for the most part, gearing up for this video, just really thinking about how much has changed, like fundamentally, like how I think about politics or how I think philosophically hasn't changed all that much about how humanity should be governed in general. And I know a lot of people think that I've went down some weird right-wing pipeline where now I'm this fundamentalist Christian conservative or alt-right, because I think that this is gonna, I hate to sound so harsh or brash, but it's true. If you're not left, you're right. And if you're not right, you're left. And so always, even since before my testimony video, I've gotten somebody ticked off. If I said something about racial injustice, people called me a lefty. And if I said something about women and how women don't treat men right, or women feeling entitled, and people said, oh, I'm like alt-right, and I'm using alt-right talking points. And so people have always accused me of being both a radical leftist or radical right, or being a Meninist, or being a radical feminist. So that's always been all over the place, and I've never really sat down and clarified, what I do believe. And so I guess we could just start from the beginning so you guys can see how much has and has not changed. And this is going to be kind of just like a really casual, just talking video, not too much editing going on. It's just me talking. But from a very, very early age, from when I could think about thinking, I was quite different from my parents. I was a lot more liberal in my thinking, or at least I would like to believe. So I would say I was a little bit more like my mother than my dad. My dad was a little bit more rigid on, how things should go. And my mom was sort of, even though I grew up Pentecostal and in a Christian household, and we, the way that we govern ourselves personally and how we behave was like, okay, we have to follow what God tells us to do. My mom was always of the camp of, you can't force people to do right. You can't try to twist someone's arm into doing what's right. You can't force consciousness. You can only tell people the truth if they ask you for it, or if you feel that it is welcomed and it'll help them. We're called to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and all you can do is just tell people your perspective, and they can either accept it or they don't accept it. And we've had various different people in our lives of many different beliefs that weren't always believers. I mean, I grew up in the hood. Not everybody was a believer, and my dad was born in Dominican Republic, raised in Puerto Rico, and then came to the U.S. when he was 15. And so he was around a variety of different people that he encountered that weren't of his same faith, and also he wasn't always following this straight and narrow path. And so he understands, and my mom understood that, they also had a path, and they've struggled to get on the right path. And you can't expect anyone to perfectly align with what you think, let alone act the way you think they ought to behave. So, you have to be gracious and compassionate and merciful. And so I find myself talking more about philosophical stuff than political stuff. So I guess this is going to be more, it's going to be both a philosophical and political kind of breakdown of my history of how I thought about thinking, I guess. And I remember the first time I ever thought of something like very political was when George Bush was running against John Kerry. So this was for his second term. And I think this was 2004, had to be, so I was probably about 8 years old. And so this was quite a big topic with the gay marriage. Because John Kerry, I believe, at that time wanted to, he supported that. And a lot of people from churches would like, no, we don't support that. And so just on that one thing alone, we're not going to support that. And my mom was like kind of torn and on like, I don't like what George Bush has done. And I honestly don't think he's going to do anything. But at the same time, I'm against gay marriage. Like that goes against the word of God. And so I don't feel comfortable voting for it either. And so immediately, my first introduction to politics was that you don't have to vote. If you don't agree with either party, you could just not vote. And that is also a valid and respectable thing to do. And I remember when we were in this church that, they would fellowship and do stuff outside of the church. And one day the pastor had called for us to go and protest gay marriage. And this was, I think, during the Obama administration. I must have been maybe 12, 13, 14 at the time. I don't remember if it was his first or second term. And they were going to go and protest. And my mom was like, well, I'm not going to protest. I mean, why would I go protest? How is that going to change people's mind for me to go and protest? And on top of that, how am I going to go protest something that the Bible says is going to happen? All of these things, just turning away from the principles of God and saying that we don't need religion and that we can just go our own way and that we can kind of change the rules of morality without consulting the Word of God. That's all in the Bible, so that's something that I can't change. Obviously, if somebody asks me or if I have the opportunity to tell somebody about the gospel of Jesus Christ, I will inform them of these things personally, but I'm not going to go marching to the White House and try to stop them from, putting gay marriage into law. That's not what's going to stop people from doing what they want to do anyway. And my personal thoughts when I was that young, I honestly was like, well, love is love. That was my idea. Even though I grew up in the church, like I said, I was very liberal-minded compared to my parents. I was like, well, I don't know if I feel comfortable with telling people that they can't get married if they truly love someone and they truly feel a connection like that with someone. I was always a hopeless romantic. And so to me, I'm just like, how can we place a restriction on somebody's freedom in that way? And if we do think that that's wrong, like us personally, like how can we put ourselves in their shoes? We're not the ones that's feeling that attraction, right? Like if I'm attracted to women, it's easy for me to say, oh, that's wrong, don't do that, and just be single for the rest of your life if you're not attracted to the opposite sex. When, for me, I'm attracted to the opposite sex. So it's not, it'd be very easy for me to judge someone based off of that, and I've always had that issue growing up in church where people were very keen on judging sins that were not their own. It's very easy to judge something that you do not face yourself. And I was of the camp of you can disagree with someone and you can respectfully tell them why you disagree. You can respectfully tell them, what God would intend for their lives. But at the end of the day, we cannot twist people's arm, nor can we force them to think how we think or feel how we feel. We can't try to censor sin. And we're definitely not convincing anyone. And I always saw sin as something that was inward. It was something that came from the heart. And no matter what, if you change your actions just because of what somebody told you or because somebody's forcing you, it does not eliminate the fact that in your heart, your deepest desires are not actually to do that. You're just doing it because someone is forcing you and compelling you to do those things. And I've always been somebody that was for freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of speech, and having discourse, despite whatever my beliefs were. No matter how wrong I thought someone was, I thought that they always should have a chance to say their side. And so around my teenage years, once I started learning about what communism was, I guess in high school, by this point in time, I always respected kind of the tribal structures, you could say, this sort of collective, it takes a tribe to raise a child sort of mentality. And I had a very communal family. Like, I had both my mom and my father in my life, but they both worked. And so my sister also took care of me. My grandmother also took care of me. We were very close-knit, and we looked out for each other. You looked out for your neighbor. You looked out for your friends. You treated your neighbor and your friends as though they were family. And so it wasn't as nuclear as a lot of kind of conservative America has sort of painted the two-parent household to be. And so I resonated a lot with the aspect of communism of sharing everything. And no matter, from each as they are capable. I know I'm butchering this statement because this is like a super casual video. From each as capable and to each as they need, meaning not everyone can put in the same amount of work. And just because someone might not be able to put in the same amount of work, it doesn't mean that they should not have their needs met, right? I mean, how did tribes treat the elderly, the disabled? How they try, a lot of times people that were born with genetic disorders were either treated like an omen, or they were treated like, well, an omen doesn't have to be bad or good, right? Like, an omen is usually a sign. So a lot of times these were people that were seen as shamans or leaders, spiritually, or wise people, that was like a sign because of these genetic disorders. But you got to think, these were people that were revered and often sometimes worshipped by people in some indigenous cultures. And I'm speaking very generally because around the world this was all different. You can't just put indigenous societies all in one box, but I'm talking like kind of pre-Western civilization. And these people, just because they couldn't walk, or because they couldn't talk, or they couldn't work in a traditional sense, it didn't mean that they were completely outcasted from society or left for dead, at least not in every society. There was, especially the elderly, if you were, you were someone that was a wise person, you were someone that was respected, and these were people that you took care of. And so I didn't believe in this sort of absolute capitalistic meritocracy, where whatever work you put in, kind of dog eat dog sort of world. And I thought that it was a mixture of, you should do your best, and society expects you to put in your best from as much as you possibly can put into society, to help yourself and to help others. But then also, sorry, that's a little awkward because one of my neighbors came out. So I gotta I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so you put in as much as you could, but you also helped other people. You didn't look at other people with disdain or resentment and said, oh, this person is an immigrant, like we shouldn't help them, or this person is a stranger, we shouldn't help them, this person isn't part of my nuclear family, this person isn't my friend, they're a stranger. I don't, like, you just looked at someone as your fellow man. And that was my philosophy, that you should strive to help people. And I definitely derived a lot of those ideas from the Bible, particularly a lot of Old Testament, Exodus, Deuteronomy stuff, and Numbers, that just spoke about how we treat strangers, how to treat people that have less than you, how to treat the widow. And so to me, of course, there were far right and far left dictators, but of course in school, I just felt like they really sort of just painted communism and socialism and all of those ideas in general as, that was just of the devil, and that's just, dictators that have absolute rule over societies, which absolutely did happen in a lot of cases, and many people would argue in most cases of communism, it winds up being that the state controls everything in a command economy. Still believed in the Constitution. I believed in the spirit of the Constitution and the letter of the Constitution, the separation of powers, but I was very liberal. You could say I was very liberal, and I was sympathetic toward communistic ideas, things like, people having Social Security benefits, things like SSI, like disability benefits, that we have to take care of people that are disabled. That schools should be publicly funded, that everyone should have access to water and to food, and that we shouldn't just see people starving on the street and think that that was okay, and that we should see it as a societal duty to make sure that everyone has their needs met beyond just personal charity. So that was me in high school. Around when I had already left the church. So you guys can kind of look at my testimony and sort of weave in some of these things into, certain things will start clicking, I guess, for you, probably more than I'm thinking right now. Around when I left high school, around 18 years old, I met this guy that was like straight up a communist. And he was like, dude, you still believe in the Constitution? I'm like, dude, don't you know, like, all the communist leaders, like, were starving their people and killing them, this, then, the third. Because, I was under this idea that you can take some ideas from it and use them, but all in all, a dictatorship was wrong. Seizing the means of production and doing a revolt where you just kill everyone that's a capitalist, and the state taking control over all of the means of production, that's just completely wrong. You can't just take stuff from people by force and give it to the poor, right? You can't just use that violence against people. And we would have conversations, and he's the one that kind of introduced communism to me from the communist perspective, from people that were actually communists, not from the public school that was more liberal, classical liberal, and had conservative values. So I heard it from out of the mouth of actual communists. So I started studying a little bit more and more and sympathizing more and more with communism there. By the time I was about 18 or 19, in a video, you'll catch me saying that I was a tribal, and I talk a lot about how I believe in free speech and how you should love people for who they are and not their politics, especially because, of course, that was a bit of a projection on my end of what I would desire, how I desire people to view me, because how many people are tribal anarchists, right? Like a lot of my ideas were very revolutionary thinking, very radical thinking, and I'm sorry to bounce around a little bit, but there was a time where I studied like libertarianism too, and anarcho-capitalism. And so I like the idea of people deciding for themselves how to govern. But then as I started studying more and more, I'm just like, no, I don't, the roads, the railroads, there's certain public goods we can't leave up to private entities. It's just so expensive that there's just not even enough of an incentive for enough people to actually be able to produce certain goods and services to where like it just either we'll be lacking in it, like the demand will not be supplied, or there will only be one or two people monopolizing the entire thing, and they get to just charge whatever they want, and it'll be dystopian. So the anarcho part I liked. The anarcho mixed with the capitalism part, it just seemed like there was no. It was very ideological, and there was no real practical theories at all about like how a society that looked like this would work, that didn't look like a dystopian sci-fi novel or something. And so yeah, I started looking more into both anarchism and communism from that friend that I had met, and he was also a martial artist too, and so martial arts shaped my philosophy a lot as well. Which I could probably talk about that in another video, but just for the sake of conciseness, I'm trying to just take you guys through a brief history rather than a 5-hour second testimony video. And so, yeah, back to that whole tribal anarchist idea. My ideal society was one where you had small nations, or you had small groups of people that governed themselves based on their own sort of ideas. And I didn't think that America I thought America was just too big to agree on anything. I mean, we have all of these different states, and that's why we have states' rights. But the idea of federal law, the idea of federalization, when I learned about the anti-federalist movement in high school, I definitely was like on the side of, I'm kind of on the side of the anti-federalists, that all the states should kind of govern themselves. And we started to run into so many problems, not only as the United States, but just humans in general. I feel like as the societies grew larger and larger, and the governing systems had to get larger and larger, we just have more dissatisfaction. I mean, look at the last several elections where it's split down the middle, I mean, and that's one of the flaws of democracy, where you have the 51% subjugating the 49%, and we can't reach a conclusion on anything because we're just so different. There's only but so much a New Yorker and a Texan has in common to be able to vote on having the same president, and obviously that's why you have states' rights and stuff like that, which we'll get to later on why I'm like big on that. But so around went for the election between Donald Trump and Hillary. That's really when I got super serious about politics. Because before that, a lot of you know that I was like for Black liberation, and I spoke about like LGBT stuff. But those were more like social issues that are influenced by politics. So it was like sort of a social commentary on certain things that had political, that were obviously, yes, they're political, but not political in the sense like I didn't really speak directly about politicians, and I wasn't as political minded where I was like, what politician is running for office, and how do you govern a society to get rid of racism and homophobia and stuff like that. I just knew that there was a problem, and I had personal ideas about how we should behave ourselves and bring awareness to these social issues. But then when I was around 20 years old for that 2016 election, that's when I really started getting into like the political systems of like, does communism work, does capitalism work? And there was all this talk about Trump being the next Hitler, and a lot of fear mongering surrounding that type of stuff. But then you looked at Hillary, and Hillary being a warmonger and a lot of pandering. It just felt like a circus show, for real, like the hot sauce in my bag stuff. And it was just, it was a crazy time. And it was the first time that I was able to vote, because prior to that, I was not old enough to vote. So this was me being 20, and I decided I was not going to vote. I'm just like, per the beginning of this video, and I said, well, that's a respectable, valid thing to do, to just not vote. And also I was kind of new to politics too, so I felt like I really didn't know that much, and although I can get informed about it, it's just, I kind of felt this sort of paralyzed in a sense, like what do I do? Like neither of these options seem like it's going to take us remotely in the direction of where I would like to see the country go. And then that's when I joined a communist party, like literally. I'm not going to say any names or anything like that of the party, just because I don't know who's watching. I mean, I doubt the CIA is watching me, but you never know. And you know, I don't want to incriminate anyone. But so, wow, that was a time. I used to meet these people at like 12 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, because there was this whole fear that Trump was going to, you know, open up the FEMA camps and start putting people in camps, you know, that he was going to be literally like the next Hitler. And so these were people that were communists that I was not all the way sided with just yet. Like I was still a sympathizer, still tribal anarchist. And so I'm pretty sure I was probably the only anarchist there. And when I say that, I mean like left anarchy. And so we would talk, and we'd talk about what we were going to do, and we did like a Black Lives Matter protest at some point. And there was just certain things that we were going to do, and we would have all these like different conversations. And that really opened my eyes as to how diverse really the left is, like the actual left, like not just liberals. Like I said, I think a lot of Americans are, no offense, but it's true, a lot of Americans are politically illiterate in the sense to where if you're not left, you're right. Like, so any point that you have that isn't like a liberal or progressive, like mainstream pop politic idea, they'll say that you're right wing for it, and vice versa. I mean, when Fidel Castro had actually died too, I think that same year or like shortly after that year, and there was like this big debate as to whether we should remember him as one of our heroes. Like a lot of people were like, he was homophobic, he threw gay people into camps, and other people were like, oh well, you know, he had to what's the word, not biohazard, he had to quarantine them because there was a whole outbreak of HIV and AIDS, and they didn't know like the nature of this virus, and so he was actually trying to help them. So there was a lot of different ideas like that. There were also people that believed in conservative Christian values, people that were Muslim. And I remember I asked this girl that was Muslim once, I was like, how does that, hold on one second, let me just raise the ISO a little bit, because it's starting to get dark out here a little bit. So yeah, so I remember asking this girl who was Muslim, I was like, hold on, like you're communist, but you're Muslim. So like I thought, you know, communists off rip supported everything that liberals supported. Like they were against homophobia, they were all for women's rights. So how do you feel about like some of the traditional values in your religion that is traditionally against being gay, or women submitting to their husbands? Like how, because I had already left the church by this time, but I already knew that Islam had a lot of those same ideas that I didn't like when I was in the church. And from her and other people that had a lot of these conservative ideas, is like, well, politically we can have these ideas about how our economy should run and workers' rights, but we can still have ways that we govern our own lives and as sovereign people, and not impose that on other people. Like we could, and there's some people that did believe that. For example, I mean, Fidel Castro, he was as left as you can get. He was a communist, but one of the first things they did was abolish like all types of drugs, all types of sex work, because if you look at the context, there was a ton of drug rings. when you have drug rings and pretty much like what we would call modern day cartels and drug rings and kingpins and prostitution rings, yeah, they got rid of all of that type of stuff. They would see that stuff as exploiting they would be exploiting workers. That wasn't seen as real work. They didn't see sex work as real work. Nowadays, the platform of a lot of communists and progressives and liberals is that sex work is real work. But if you ask a lot of communists today, they will say that no, that sex work, porn, all of that stuff is moral depravity and it is degrading, and they don't believe that people would actually do that if there wasn't a need, if there wasn't such a wealth disparity, that no one dreams of being that. They do it because of trauma and necessity. And so there's a lot of people that didn't like the fact that I was an anarchist. I didn't believe in vanguardism. I didn't believe in overthrowing the government and then just forcing everybody else to go with whatever we think the people need or what workers' rights should be. But they believe, well, nobody's ever going to become conscious, like, because you're fighting a propaganda machine. So we have to use violence in order to, get people what they truly deserve, because they don't even know what they deserve. And this whole Marxist idea that it'll be the middle class and not the rag class or the lumpen proletariat, it would be the proletarian class, the working class, that would actually fight for these freedoms, the workers' rights, and seize the means of production. And then you have people like the Black Panthers that said, no, we can use the criminals, those that are incarcerated, those that are homeless, people that are jobless, unemployed. It's the rags of society that we need to call in and radicalize. So there was just so many different ideas as to how to achieve the same goal of people having the best workers' rights that they possibly could. And in my mind, I was like, communism is better, like the ideal communism, where the government goes away and they don't have ownership of everything and the people own everything and they govern themselves. That was my idea of communism. Whereas a lot of capitalists see it as, oh, well, the state takes over the means of production and they just get so drunk off the power they never give it back to the people. They'll never say, oh yeah, the people are ready to govern themselves. And, this was true of things like Leninism and vanguardism. This was true of things like Stalinism. This is true. I mean, when I had someone say something to me, like I said, oh, well, why can't you vote, right? Like, why can't it be a democracy? And he said, well, a democracy is just a dictatorship of the masses. There's going to be certain things where you can only do one thing, right? Like, for example, if you can't vote on, you can't compromise on, in Hitler's time, do we kill, this is going to be so demonetized, do we kill all the Jews? Right? I mean, I don't care about the demonetization stuff. Like, I as y'all can see, I've always talked about the craziest topics on here. It's funny that people think that this is a grift, because if I was a grifter, I would probably be the worst grifter ever, because the videos that I have made, anything that's political, is probably the biggest financial failure that I've ever come up with. No one can make a living just doing the type of stuff that I do on here. But anyway, yeah, like with Hitler, do you decide, do you kill all of the Jews or none of the Jews? And what do you, if half of the people vote to kill the Jews, what do? Do you just kill half of them? And that's, so a democracy is a dictatorship of the masses. That concept that somebody had believed in and was telling me about was like, and I was like, oh, okay, I see now, like, why people, why it doesn't ultimately matter. And then I also started, like, looking at some technocratic stuff. Like, I mean, should everyone have the same equal right to vote on everything, right? Like, should someone who's an expert on automobiles, right? Like, should their vote count just as much as any Joe Schmo that knows nothing about automobiles as to whether or not we design automobiles in a certain way that's safe for people, you know, so just certain things. It's kind of a little bit of a ramble here, but I'm just still kind of in awe of just how diverse politics are, just how colorful politics are, how colorful the human mind truly is. And it really saddens me when I see people that have this black and white two-party system mentality where it's like you're either a Republican or you're a Democrat. You're either left or right. It's really, people forget about up and down. And even when you look at the political compass as up, down, left, right, of authoritarian statist versus anarchism, democracy, true democracy, and communism versus capitalism, even that is so two-dimensional that it really doesn't show the sort of 3D cloud that is politics, political science, and philosophy, and why people believe the things that they do, and how so many people can even agree on a goal and yet have dozens and dozens of different methods as to how they achieve them, based on their morality, based on not just their moral and family values and religious values, but also with engineering, right? Like we're all naturally engineers, we're all naturally problem solvers. And so there's a give and take with everything. And so you have to always sacrifice. Something has to get sacrificed to achieve a certain goal. And for some people, that grow up in so much violence or feel as though the working class is under such the threat of death and violence, they're like, well, we're justified to make a revolution and off with all of the rich people's heads. And I had a Christian background, so that just never meshed well with me to say, I would never have been fully okay with this idea that there was going to come a day where we just kill all the rich people and take over land, right? And then just redistribute the means of production. That never sat well with me. And then over time, once it got to, let's skip a little bit ahead. When I started meditating, getting into Buddhist meditation and stuff, I was maybe about 22. And I really took a back seat on the politics and really started getting into spiritual-minded things and looking at the root of political ideas and where these things come from and why people want the things that they want. And started taking things less personal, started putting myself in the shoes of people that were just not like me, people that thought completely different to me. Like, how could they come to these conclusions? And I think what really triggered that was I became that's what really happened. I became very disillusioned, and I really, really hated how Leftbook played out. Like being on Facebook, a lot of the bickering that would happen about stuff like microaggressions, a lot of the policing and, oh, you need to self-crit because this Asian dude said for show. And it was like, you're using AAVE, which is African American vernacular colloquialism for Ebonics, as a lot of people would say, which is offensive to some people, but he said for show. And it was like, oh, this is AAVE. And he was like, oh, well, I'm from the Bay Area and we all say for show and hella. And these are just things that we say. And they're like, no, that's black culture and you're appropriating it and you need to self-criticize. And you would have to write a whole dissertation self-critiquing yourself, self-policing yourself, or else you would just get kicked out of the Facebook group. And a lot of very cult-minded things. And it's funny because a lot of people pretended to be of one accord on that page and acted like, oh yeah, like this is what we all believe. But then when you talked in private messages with a lot of these certain people, they were like, yeah, they're doing too much, or there was always somebody that was on that side until they were the ones that needed to self-crit, until they were the ones that were being attacked and getting dogpiled by everybody that was calling them a colorist or racist or transphobic for a variety of different reasons, and it was always this thing with like, you were automatically a transphobe if you weren't trans. If you're not black, then you're automatically anti-black. If you're not a woman, then you are automatically a misogynist, because the identity politics is that because you benefit from the system of misogyny, of racism, of whatever it is, and you're not a victim of these things, then you are automatically the abuser. And reading books like The Fourth Agreement, stuff like that, and I'm getting more into spirituality, I just started to be like, this feels wrong. Like, this is philosophically off to look at the world as abusers and the abused, victim and perpetrator. Things just weren't that black and white, especially looking in some of my personal relationships. As I started meditating, just realizing, there was a lot I did wrong, there's a lot that they did wrong, and it just felt like every relationship I would see, especially people that were on the left, it always wound up being the other, one person calling the other person the narcissist. Oh, my ex-girlfriend is a narcissist, blah, blah, blah. You go to her page, oh, my ex-boyfriend is a narcissist, he did this and the third. It was always like people put each other in this box, because if you weren't the victim, then you were the abuser. And who wants to be the abuser? Who wants to be the abuser, right? And so this was a problem. And I really took a step back from all of the politics in general and said, like, there's just so many issues with all of these things. Sorry, I'm just still contemplating a lot of this stuff. I'm still kind of unpacking a lot of this stuff, and not even unpacking. I'm trying to make sense of what has already been unpacked. Like, people talk about unpacking, but people don't talk about comprehending what you just unpacked, because the human mind is just so, it's just cosmic vomit. And you're trying to like take out all the chunks and see where the tomatoes and the corn is, and seeing what you had for breakfast to make you think these things. Again, if you see my testimony video, I'm not gonna go through all of that stuff all over again. But once I came to Christ, there was a lot of things socially, not even a lot of things socially. Really, it was the LGBT stuff, me being trans, me being polyamorous, me being promiscuous, or being sex positive, aka, hookup culture, or having sex with whoever you feel like having sex with in the moment, and stuff like that. That to me, I just realized it caused so much damage, not only in my life, but in the lives of people that I've seen. Mostly talking about sexual promiscuity, sex outside of a marriage, the level of confusion that would happen with people that engaged in that, and hookup culture. I've never seen a good outcome. I've never seen people happy that participate in that, and in situationships, and not knowing what's next because you're engaging in all these things with zero level of commitment. I'm not gonna talk about that for a long time, but to put it in a nutshell, obviously when you become Christian, some things are gonna change just socially. When you start aligning yourself with the Bible. The Bible doesn't really talk too much about economics like that. It's not a sin to believe in collectivist economics. It's not a sin to be a conservative. It's not a sin to be a liberal. It's not a sin to be an anarcho-capitalist. It's not a sin to believe in those kind of structures. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's, right? As long as you're acting in a way that, number one, loves God, and number two, loves your neighbor, you can do that across various different systems of government. A lot of people will argue that you can't. And so obviously, while I believe that the design of God is to have family values, to be one man, one woman within the confines of a committed marriage, that's very different from the lifestyle that I had before. I don't believe that that belief should now transfer over into some theocracy, some Christian fundamentalist theocracy, where you're forcing people to behave a certain way. I don't think that that's the way that you're gonna demonstrate the truth of God and who he is and what he wants for your life for people. And so not much has changed about how I feel people should be governed. When it comes to the abortion laws, yeah, I take a hard stance on that. I find it crazy that so many people during COVID, that's another thing that really confused me. When all of the communists, I'm gonna come back to the abortion thing, because we have to talk about this. All of the communists that I knew were saying that we had to vote for Biden when Trump was gonna run the second time. And I was like, we spoke so much junk about the Democrats and the two-party system and the liberals, and you want to vote Biden just because you hate Trump. Now you're participating in this system that you talked so much junk about just because you believe that Trump is literally Hitler, but the last 4 years, he hasn't done none of the stuff that y'all been fear-mongering us about. So clearly, we overcalculated, we overestimated, you know, what Trump was really gonna do. And I couldn't help but feel like the communists and all of these radical progressives and stuff on college campuses, like it was all these college educated folks. And I was somebody that dropped out of high school, and so I wasn't as active, but I was definitely a thinker, and I could definitely hold my weight going back and forth just on a common sense level. And I just was telling folks, like, y'all really hate Trump so much that y'all willing to betray your own values and go with the establishment based off of what? It feels like the Democrats were just manipulating all of the communists and the progressive, and they just kind of just like tried to sweep everybody under their wing and say, oh yeah, you guys, we got you guys. The Democratic Party has changed a lot in the last 10 years. Like the stuff that they run pretty much just 100% off of identity politics now. Everything about, so we support gay, we support black, we support women, we support, they rarely ever talk about actual things that are gonna be implemented. Their primary focus is talking about how they help the little guy, but they don't help the little guy. And so it made me lose a lot of respect for these Leftbook wokies that was talking all of this junk and being so ideological, and now all of a sudden, oh yeah, we have to compromise. No, now you self-crit. Now you self-crit. Because all of that y'all was talking about. And I was really tight about that. And then, you know, all of these people that was supposedly so anti-government and didn't trust the government were so quick to say, yeah, trust the government to take these vaccines. And I said, okay. I was one of the people that was like, guys, stay home. The best way to move forward from this pandemic is to stay home, socially distance. But no, y'all just all wanted to go take a vaccine, and y'all was shaming people. I had a friend that was shaming me because I didn't have the vaccine, and it had been like a year or two before it came. I was like, I'm not taking the vaccine. I don't even go nowhere. You know what? From the beginning, I followed the instructions and I was obedient, and I stood my butt home. All of y'all want to party. That's why y'all want the vaccine. You say, oh, it helps, blah, blah, blah. Bruh. People were still getting COVID at conventions and parties and events where they were mandated to have a vaccine, and COVID was still being transmitted. People weren't getting sick, they weren't dying, but it was still being transmitted after the fact, after they told us that it couldn't be transmitted. So that, to me, it felt so disingenuous. It felt like no one really believed all the stuff they were saying. They were just ideologues, but then when spit hit the fan, they were all just ready to be obedient to the government. And I'm like, okay, vaccine, fine. But then you're gonna tell me there's a booster, and then another booster, and then another booster? And you're gonna tell me that I'm a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist if I say that they just trying to make some bread off of the situation? So that killed me. That completely severed my trust in any of these academic ivory tower wine sipping socialists. I still would consider myself an anarcho-syndicalist, which is basically like a tribal anarchist, just a different name, except it's just more focused on industries and you know the certain trades. It's a little bit more modern, right? Like, I mean, we don't live in tribes, so you can't just have a bunch of different tribes with different values trading on a treaty with one another. It would be more so that the owners own the means of production, but it would also be governed and separated based on, you know, what the area of expertise was. You know, I believe in rotating government. I still believe in government. I don't believe in just no government. A lot of people hear anarcho and they think that means like chaos. There's no government. It just means that the government is very limited and it's also rotated. They don't have as much, it's not a state that has a monopoly over violence. And I'm still kind of working out some of those things, because it's like, I mean, that was one thing that we had issues with too, like anarchists versus communists. So like, okay, so in an anarchist revolution, if you abolish the military, you abolish everything. What happens then? What happens when the feudalists and the Nazis come and try to seize power in the power vacuum? What happens then? If you do not have a vanguard, if you do not have a military to protect the interest of the workers, to protect the workers, who's to stop all of these people from seizing back the means of production if you don't abolish the military? If you know, say, you know, every man for themselves and everybody gets to do, it doesn't work. So obviously I'm still, you know, I'm working out some of those kinks in that. I don't have not even half of this stuff figured out, because I'm more focused on my relationship with God at the forefront. That's like my main priority. But I did want to tell y'all some of what I believe, political wise, because a lot of y'all are confused. Y'all hear me talking junk about woke media and stuff like that. I said I was going to get back to the abortion thing. All the time y'all said, trust the scientists, trust the scientists, trust the scientists, when it came to the COVID thing. During the whole Roe v. Wade thing, ask the scientists, when does life begin? They will tell you at conception. It's a life. It's a life. It's not just your DNA anymore. It's not just the man's DNA nor the woman's DNA. It's a life. It's a person now. You know, you can't just calling something a clump of cells, you know, using euphemisms like this does not change that fact. And sadly, I've had my hand in pushing a lot of these ideas that dehumanized the lives of people that cannot defend themselves, people that can't speak for themselves. Maybe that could be a later video, but I've kind of talked about that too in my testimony video. So I hope you guys enjoyed a little bit of that, this candid little thing. Let me know if y'all like some more of these things. I'll make sure I do it a little bit earlier in the day, so I'm not kind of just sitting out here in the dark by the latter half of the video. Also just wanted to test out this camera. This is the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, and the low light is incredible. This looks amazing, even with the ISO all the way up on blast. Shout out to my friend Insano for recommending it to me. I'm gonna be taking this thing everywhere. Video following this, I was originally gonna make a video talking about whether I'm gonna vote or not this year, the importance of voting, should we vote? But then I was like, you know what? I should probably give a political background of everything, lay everything out a spread, because everybody thinks I'm a right winger just because I'm Christian and just because I attack the woke media in a video or two. So, but like I said, politics is so diverse, and hopefully this kind of inspired some thought into, inspired people to kind of go and research more within the people they disagree with, like whether you disagree with right wingers or left wingers. There's so many different thoughts you may not disagree with as much as you think you disagree with. You know, I mean, with Fidel Castro, people would call him a right-wing dictator nowadays, according to the standards of what y'all say left-wing is. Because, you know, being anti-drug, being anti-sex work, and even arguably homophobic, people say, because he rounded up all the gays by profiling feminine men or whatever. You know, there's so many rumors about how that happened. There's a lot of different rumors about Fidel Castro, a lot of things that, you know, we know and don't know. So it's just very interesting. He's just one example. It's not linear, man. It's not even circular. It's a freaking tesseract. That's what the political compass is. But God bless y'all all, no matter where you stand politically. And I hope no matter what comes of this election, that whoever is in office, that God blesses them with the wisdom to move us in a direction that is favorable for all people to have a better life, even if it's just 1% better, right? I mean, it's only the next 4 years and there's so much work to do. So, you know, don't put too many eggs into this, and don't get too stressed out, and don't start killing each other over this one next election. And we'll get talking about that vote and stuff on the next one. I'ma holla at y'all.